Well, good morning, everybody. Yes, it is Sunday, the 11th of February today. I was going to record yesterday, but then couldn't for various reasons, which I'll explain further into the video. But welcome along to this little podcast of mine, which is about my life in the fibre arts. So who am I? My name is Jared, or Peter, or Boniface. I am a former monk and a former bus driver. I live in Abingdon-on-Thames in Oxfordshire in the south of England. It's a town 7 miles south of the city of Oxford. And I live with my two cats, Toby and Bunty. Toby has already approached me because I started talking to you, so no doubt he will put in his usual customary and nay compulsory appearance at some point. Yes, you can look at me like that. I know you're there. And I am a crocheter and a knitter and a sewer, a weaver. I will eventually become a spinner when I get round to it. And you know, I think Lent is going to be my my point of getting round to doing a number of different things. So welcome. Welcome if you are a returning viewer and a subscriber. Thank you for coming back to spend some time with me. Welcome if you are a new viewer. You're very welcome to listen to my ramblings about life, the universe and everything. And I hope you find something of interest while you're here. And if you do, please subscribe. I currently am recording approximately once a week. So if you subscribe, you'll get a notification when I upload my videos. I am intending at some point in the next month or so to do a live broadcast, so you will need to be subscribed with the notifications turned on in order to know when that is happening. I will try and give some advance notice of that in my weekly episode, but just to be safe, you really need to know you really need to be subscribed to get the notification, rather. So, without much further ado, I have a finished object, an FO. Actually, I won't start with a finished object. What I will do is start with my first whip. You may recall last week I decided that I might just mix it up a little bit how I'm recording these videos. So on Tuesday, on the 6th of February, I actually recorded a special insert, actually a couple of special inserts, the first of which I will now put in here. As I suggested last week, I have decided to experiment a little with the format of these episodes, so I'm recording this actually on Tuesday the 6th of February. So today is in fact the actual podiversary, so thank you for all the messages that people have sent. And I'm not quite sure how it's going to work, so it will be as much news to me on Saturday as it is to you how I decide to cut everything together and make it work. But I thought I would talk about my whip, which is the Scania shawl knit along that I'm doing with the grocery girls, with the Seabourn Highland Twist sock. Seabourn Highland Twist sock, that's right, which is an 80% Highland wool and 20% polyamide, so polyester nylon style. I've just finished all of the horizontal bars, so this is the last one that I've done. Toby, what are you doing? Oh, do you know? I don't know. So this is the very last row that I've done. So the shawl overall now has quite significant dimensions, and will obviously have, once I've stretched it out, blocked it and washed it and blocked it, it will stretch out to be a straight line across, and you can see it's got quite a nice size to it. I absolutely love the marled look, and particularly because of the palette chosen, which is all shades of pinks and purples. It really does blend so beautifully together. So I'm really very pleased with the way this is going. I've now just got to do some short rows around to turn the corner, and then I will be making the same border pattern that's here along this long edge and casting off as I go. So basically the last stitch is knitted into a stitch on this long row, so that as I get to this end, I literally will have just the last few stitches to cast off it. I think I have to make an I-cord border along that edge as well, but I'm not sure, so I will follow the pattern obviously. But so I just wanted to give you an update on that. I had 5 colours in this shawl, and they're various shades of, I'll just grab my bag which has got the 2 current colours in there, so I've got something to show you. And they're graded from dark all the way down to light. These are the main 2 colours. So there were 100 grams, so 2 50-gram balls, hanks as it were, of these 2 colours, but everything else was 1 50-gram hank. And this is what I have left of the 3 other colours, and it's about, I mean, slightly more of the purple. I'm not quite sure how, but I've not weighed them yet, but my guess is that there's probably 15 or 20 grams in each, which means that they will be ideal, given that they're a sock twist yarn, 4-ply. They'll be ideal for heels, toes and cuffs on socks that I make. So this is quite nice. I've just started the second ball of each of these, so I'm obviously going to have quite a bit of this left as well. So as far as I mean, when I did my swatch, I got gauge, so I'm expecting this to be, and it looks as though it's about the right size as well, so I'm not quite sure whether I should have this amount of wool left over, but I'm quite pleased that I have. It's not a problem, and there's certainly other, I love, as I said last week on Saturday, this Cloudborn, why do I keep calling it Seedborn? It's Cloudborn yarn is really very nice. It's very, very soft and squishy and really pleasant in the hand. And I think because I've had it mauled with lots of different colour combinations going throughout, it hasn't felt boring, even though obviously the stockinette panel section has just got bigger and bigger and bigger as each row goes by. It's not felt like a chore to knit. So yes, I'm getting to the short rows will be quite straightforward, the edge will be quite straightforward, the second border. The I-cord bind off probably will be quite straightforward as well. I'm just not sure yet how this unravels, and only this unravels, so I'm be quite keen to read through and exactly how I'm supposed to do that. But I'm quite hopeful that this is going to be a really nice shawl when it's finished, so that's something a whip that maybe by Saturday I will have completed most of it, if not all of it, apart from the blocking. So we shall see what the future holds on that account. So you've learned about my finished object, or rather my whip. It is now a finished object, and here it is. My lovely, beautiful Scania shawl. The fringe has worked perfectly. I know in the video I said I wasn't sure how the fringe would work. Of course, I hadn't really given it a lot of thought. Fortunately, the Grocery Girls themselves published an update which included the fringe and the I-cord bind off and the fringe. And as a result of that, I had a, of course, kind of moment. I'll go to the right end this time. I noticed in the video I kept talking about the wrong end where the I-cord bind off was going to be. So this is the end of the work. Now what you'll notice is that all of these stitches at this end have been bound off by the I-cord. And if we go to the very end of the pattern, which is this end, I knitted, so I did a short row corner to turn the corner here, and then did the border going up this short side and tied it to the last stitch of each row as I got to it. And then I only had an I-cord bind off to do across this short section here. So of course when I dropped these 4 stitches on this end, they all fell out all the way down, which created the fringe. But of course, and it's so obvious when you think about it, knitting unravels downwards. It doesn't unravel crossways. If you drop a stitch, it drops every stitch in the column. So by dropping those 4 stitches, every stitch below them fell out, but the 5th stitch was bound off with the I-cord bind off, and all the way across the top and all the way across here. So there is no way that those stitches are going to come out unless I unravel each of the ends from here and take it back through the stitches and unpick it sideways, which of course I'm not going to do. So I like learning new things, and now I've learned a new trick, and of course the moment it was explained I thought, yes, of course, that's obvious. Why didn't I think of that before? Yes, well done, Bunty. I don't know. Noises off, as they say. So I soaked it yesterday, and this is why one of the reasons I'm recording today. I soaked this yesterday and then blocked it, and I'll put a picture of the blocking in here, because I thought, how am I going to stretch this out such a way that it would open up the lovely faux cables that you can see here, with the eyelet in the middle of the cable. And how am I going to do that in such a way that it really opens this up? Because I didn't want to be pinning every single one of the loops that make up the fringe. And I thought, oh, I'm going to have to buy some blocking wires. And then I thought, well, if I buy blocking wires, they're not going to arrive for at least another day, so I wouldn't be able to do it until today. And then I remembered that I have literally dozens and dozens of plastic and aluminium knitting needles from my mother. And I use those, I've threaded them into each of the loops and then pinned them out stretched, and it really works. It's a very Heath Robinson-esque approach, but it works. Use what you have available in the home. So I'm very pleased. I'm very pleased with the colours. I'm very pleased with the patterning. I really like the whole thing, and having blocked this, it's even more. This Cloudborne Highland Twist sock, which is 100%. It's 80% Highland superwash wool and 20% polyamide, which is a form of acrylic, basically. And it is incredibly soft against the skin. So I'm really looking forward to giving this to the person who wanted me to make it. And I'll let you know how that goes when they have it in their hands, and possibly even have a picture of them wearing it, which would be very nice. So that's my finished object. Having done a finished object, I then thought I might as well, my New Year's resolution still stands. I want to finish off things that I've got in the pile next to me on my left, and I'm slowly but surely getting through them anyway. But I had one whip which I wasn't happy about. You may remember I bought the Wizard of Oz sock patterns, which are a series of 4 patterns made by Lisa Ross in 2016. She's Paper Daisy 1 on Ravelry. And this pattern is the Just Follow, it's called, which is, if you look at the sock leg, you can actually see it's little bricks, intending to mimic the yellow brick road. So I'd cast one on quite a while ago and got about halfway up the foot, and I'd made a few mistakes and I wasn't enjoying it, and I was also very concerned that the sock was very small, and I was making the largest size, but it looked as though it was really not going to fit me, which I would have still given them to somebody else, but I quite like these socks myself. I'm a great fan of the Wizard of Oz, I always have been. And I'd also been watching a few videos recently on two at a time sock knitting, because it was taking such a long time on such small needles to knit this one sock that I was also worried that having knit the one, I wasn't going to knit the pair, so I was going to end up with single sock syndrome. And I decided that I would frog what I'd done so far. I'd learned the basic techniques of the pattern, so it was going to be easy to redo it, but I would do it as a 2-up. But I was genuinely concerned about the size of the needle I was using. Well, I looked on the pattern and and on the wool band that I was using, which is, I always keep it with the knitting. So here we are, it's in my little bag, and it is the Signet Yarns Truly Wool Rich 4-ply, and it's in their 2041 yellow colourway. And I've got my glasses. There we are, Bob. Have my glasses with me, and sorry, put them on properly, straight. There we go. And the needle size is 2.75 to 3.25. Or is it 3.5? It could be 3.5. But basically sock size needles. So I thought, well, I'd taken the needles out of my Chinese knitting set, which had the correct number on the label. But I thought, well, maybe let me just check that I'm actually using the right needle size. Well, when I checked it against my millimeter needle gauge rather than just the sizing for the numbers that the Chinese pack has, I discovered that these are actually the needles I should be using. These were the needles I was using. There's quite a significant size difference between them, which I think you can see, but I mean, certainly you can feel the difference. So I put these back in my set. I discovered that I was using a 1.25, no, a 1 millimeter needle, these are, or 1.25. And I've got a 3 millimeter needle here, I think it is, or it's a 2.75. I think it's 3 millimeter, but it may be 2.75 millimeters. And I have cast on 2 socks, and I've been very careful, making sure that they are separate with 1 ball of yarn per sock, and I put the yarn in this beautiful little knitting bag that Wendy made for me for Christmas, and they fit in the bottom very nicely. So it means that I knit across the instep of the first one and then across the instep of the second one, and then because I'm magic looping, I turn and readjust the needles, but then I also just pick up the bag and turn that, and it stops the yarn from getting twisted. So every turn I make clockwise with the needles, I make a corresponding clockwise turn with the bag underneath. And I started these again, I think I actually cast them on Friday night, but I spent a little bit of time yesterday morning knitting these. So I have just finished the toe increases, and I mean, as you can see, they're looking much more like the kind of sock that a grown man could wear rather than a doll, which the previous ones were turning out into. I have my beginning of round stitch markers there, just a little bit of jewellery for my knitting. But it also lets me know which side is the instep and which side is the sole. I have discovered, though, that with the yellow yarn on a silver cable or silver needle, it's very difficult. Even with the glasses, my eyes are swimming. So I have been using my magnifying glass on this one, and it does make life a lot easier. Makes it a lot clearer what I'm doing. So yeah, I'm making good progress with that, and I'm quite hopeful that these will quite quickly now start to knit up into full-size sock. So that's my whip as well. Well, I don't have many purchases. I've been a very good boy. I went to Mason's with Wendy yesterday, both the fabric shop and the yarn shop, and didn't buy any fabric or any yarn. Wendy is making some bits and pieces, and she needed some extra fabric. She had little samples of what she needed, and we just bought that. And then she was looking. Was it Friday? Might have been Thursday. I think it was Thursday. I popped in to see Bob and Wendy on my way home. It was Thursday, and Wendy has a new pattern that she wants to make, but it's in crochet, but it's written instructions, and she finds the written instructions. She's very good at following written knitting patterns, but she finds charts easier for crochet. So I spent an hour or so converting the written instructions of her crochet pattern into a repeat chart for her. And so she wanted to find the right wool or acrylic or whatever she wants to use for it. It's a little blanket, a chevron blanket. It's a very nice pattern actually, and I think it will look lovely when it's finished. And so we went into Masons so that she could see what colours were available for her in the various types of yarn that she might want to use to make it. So we had a very constructive time. I saw once again the Serdar Snuggle Baby wheel and cake, rather, the brown one, which I almost bought but didn't. The only reason I didn't is because I don't... Need is the wrong word. I don't want to bring in anything else until I've really started getting this lot down. So I'm working my way through this pile first. So I am being rather like with snacks and biscuits and things. The best way to avoid temptation is not to have it present for you. If I bought the yarn, I'd then have to cast something on or hook something up, and so I'd just be adding to my pile of yet to be completed tasks. So you'll excuse me a second. My tea today is spiced apple, which is a Waitrose special, and it rather reminds me... Just put the teapot down. Sorry, Bunty. Sorry, I was leaning across you. It was both hands over to the side. Never mind. The scent rather reminds me of a pudding we used to have at school, which I've only ever had at school. I've never had it... I mean, it's not a difficult pudding to make. It was an apple that was... a whole apple that was cored, and in the core was stuffed a sugar, raisins and spice mixture. And then the whole thing was baked in the oven for, I guess, about half an hour, 40 minutes, until it had gone deliciously caramelised, but there was still a bit of crunch left in the apple. And then we had this thin white sauce, which I guess was meant to be a rum sauce. Although being a junior school, I think it's highly unlikely they actually had any rum in it. More's the pity, but there you go. And this tea smells just like that. It's funny, the remembrances that aromas can bring back. So you'll excuse me a second. Such a lovely tea. So while I was in Masons, I didn't buy any wool because I'm a good boy. I am. But I did see a very nice little book, which is by West Yorkshire Spinners. You'll remember I put it in my craftsy sack for safekeeping, but I bought the Wensleydale wool gems in 5 colours, which I'm going to be making into the fox paws wrap pattern thingy majiggy. Sorry, papers everywhere. It's actually a magazine, but there you go. But and what reminded me of that is that, well, the price tag's on the back, but it doesn't matter. It's £4.20. On the back, what reminded me was the fact it had an advert for the Wensleydale gems. So in fact, when I was thinking about what I could have been saying, I could have just been looking at the... Sorry. Anyway, it's called Crochet Winter Warmers, and it's a little book of patterns to make items like this lovely triangular wrap, which I just love the colours as much as anything else, but it's, you know, it looks quite interesting. And this lovely sweet shop blanket, candy blanket. But the most adorable pattern in here, and both Wendy and I immediately fell in love with her, is Heather the Lucky Sheep, which I just think she is so adorable. I think you can possibly see that it's a ruffled pattern to make up the body, so that she's got some sense of the luxurious wool patterning around her. So this is actually made in the Air Valley DK, which is West Yorkshire Spinners. I've used that Air Valley Aran to make my first 2 pairs of socks because I wanted to make big socks so that I could learn the techniques without stressing over the tiny needles and tiny yarns. And it's a lovely, I think I mentioned at the time, I really liked the feel of the yarn. I've got some West Yorkshire Spinners 4-ply for making some crochet socks that are proper sock size, as it were, the thin socks that will fit in my shoes. But I've not used the DK yet, so I'm strongly minded to make this at the moment. So there are some lovely patterns, but they also give an explanation of how they take the wool from the sheep to the hook. And all the different processes it has to go through, and then the designer has a few bits and pieces, and then we're into the patterns proper. And I thought, at £4.20, I thought it was good value for money because it's, as I was saying to Wendy, a single pattern can cost £3 in the Masons. So there are multiple patterns in here that I'm actually quite interested in. So £4.20 seemed nothing at all, really, for what is actually quite a nice little book. They do also have one of these for their new Crofters Tweed, which is made with 100% Shetland wool. And it's a fantastic wool. It's a little bit more pricey, but I am covetous of it, and I do want to make myself a cardigan or jumper at some point in the future. But as I say, I'm being very good. I'm not doing anything else until I got rid of all this. So that was my acquisition of the week. So that's basically everything in terms of my knitting and crocheting, which it is coming along really nicely. I really have been re-energized over the last week or so. As much because of all the wonderful messages of support and the positive feedback I got about the video last week, and I'll put another snip from Tuesday's pre-recording in here. I want to say thank you to everybody who has left me messages concerning Saturday's podcast. I felt it was appropriate. I felt the occasion was right for me to share a little bit more about me as a person. As I said on Saturday, my mental health condition is something I have learned over the years to live with and to accommodate and to work around where necessary. It's obviously touched a chord with many of you who have gone through similar experiences or have family and friends who've gone through similar experiences, and I'm very pleased that you felt able to share that with me. One of the coping mechanisms I think I have when I'm suffering from bouts of melancholia, shall we call it, I think one of the things to do is not to simply wallow in the darkness and misery, because that doesn't help. And cognitive behavioural therapy in particular is designed to help you recognise the triggers, to recognise the spiral points, so that you don't end up just circling the plug hole before you descend into it. But acknowledging feelings of loss, sorrow, sadness, emptiness can be helpful. It can help to recognise that the emotions, while they may be extreme, have a genuine cause, that it's not a figment of your imagination. I'm not sure that suppressing real emotion is a very helpful response to any kind of mental health issue. Bereavement, for example, it's important to grieve. It's important to recognize the sense of loss. It's important to recognize the value that that person that you have lost had for you in your life. It's important that you recognize their intrinsic value as a person. And of course, their absence and permanent absence is going to make you unhappy. And it's crying and being sad for that loss is actually a healthy response to loss. And this reminded me of stories that were told during the Second World War of people like Dame Vera Lynn, who was the forces sweetheart in the United Kingdom, sang White Cliffs of Dover and We'll Meet Again as the two most famous. And one of the things that she said in interviews when she was younger, and she's still alive, she's in her hundreds now, but she doesn't give television interviews as much anymore because of her advanced years. But in the past she said that it was a mistake when visiting soldiers in hospital or in their camps overseas. It was important not to try to be jolly all the time, that to sing sad and sentimental romantic songs helped them to deal with their feelings, missing their mothers and wives and fathers and brothers and sisters and children, because those emotions are real and they need to be acknowledged, and it gave a safe kind of environment in which those feelings could be experienced and acknowledged without it becoming maudlin and without it distracting from the discipline of the army and so on and so forth. And I found myself over the last couple of weeks listening to a particular piece of music which means a great deal to me. It's Civitas Sancti Tui by William Byrd, and the text is taken from the Lamentations of Jeremiah, but it's actually an Advent hymn, Rorate Caeli, which is descend from the heavens like dew, let your mercy descend from the heavens like dew, O Lord, kind of thing. And the text is a very short text. It's Civitas Sancti Tui deserta facta est, Sion deserta facta est, Jerusalem desolata est, which in English is more or less, your holy cities have become barren wastelands. Zion has become a barren wasteland. Jerusalem has been laid waste. Which, is about the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonian kings and the forced exile of the people of Judah to Babylon in the, get my biblical history right now, the 6th century or possibly the 5th. Was it? Whichever. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's a long time since I did my scriptural theology. And Byrd was born either right at the very end of Henry VIII's reign or right at the very beginning of Edward VI. So I'm not sure which. So he was born into a country which was about to become quite fundamentally very Protestant. Edward VI was the most Protestant of the English kings. Henry VIII, although he'd split with Rome, had remained, broadly speaking, Catholic. He'd moved the liturgy to being in English, but the Book of Common Prayer, written by Thomas Cranmer, was pretty much a straightforward translation of the Roman Liturgy of the Hours and the Liturgy of the Mass. It wasn't what Cranmer wanted, and he saw his opportunity when Edward VI became king to really reform the English church into a Protestant reformed church similar to those on the continent, far more Calvinist perhaps than Lutheran in that respect. Henry VIII's church was pretty much the English equivalent of Lutheranism. And so William Byrd was actually born a Protestant and raised a Protestant, but became a Catholic in his 20s, which would put it into the 1560s, which was the first 10 years or so of Elizabeth I's reign. But in 1570, Elizabeth was excommunicated by Pius V, and Catholics were relieved of their duty to obey her. In fact, it was considered to be a mortal sin if they did obey her, because she was a heretic queen. And of course, the response of the Elizabethan government was to criminalise Catholicism, and it became a matter of treason to be a Catholic, to be a Catholic priest, to hide a Catholic priest. And we see people being arrested and executed. And indeed, the gunpowder plot was a response to the perceived extremities of Elizabethan persecution and the concerns that James VI and First would carry on a similar policy when he became king. But William Byrd, by the 1570s, was therefore lamenting the loss of what he believed to be the true religion, the loss of the real presence of Jesus Christ, body and soul, body and blood, soul and divinity in the Eucharist on the altar, the real presence of transubstantiation, so on and so forth, the Latin liturgy, the numinous quality of liturgy as celebrated by the Latin Church, as opposed to the rather humanist liturgy celebrated by the now Reformed Protestant Church in England. Even though that Reformed Protestantism was much less extreme under Elizabeth, it was still much lower in the hierarchy, if you like, of numinous celebrations than, say, the Latin Mass. And if you listen to Civitas Sancti Tui, the opening description, it begins with all the voices proclaiming the holy cities. So you get the bass line comes through, which kind of grounds the whole piece, but then the bass line quickly disappears when it starts moving into the deserta facta est, made into a wasteland. And the impression you're given of the higher voices weaving in and out of their polyphony is of desert winds blowing here and there with nothing to stop them. It's just a desolate wasteland, a soundscape. And then the basses fold back in a little bit in the Deserta Facta Est, but really come in on the repeat of the Zion Deserta Facta Est, really giving a sense of foreboding and of what is to come, which is that Jerusalem is laid waste. And Jerusalem is laid waste is an interesting conceit, really, because it's the Desolata Est that is laid waste is longer than the whole of the rest of the motet that precedes it. So it's, even though it's the shortest phrase, effectively, it becomes the longest piece of music, because the overwhelming sense of loss, the overwhelming sense of the destruction of God's presence in our midst overcomes the composer to a large extent. But, and this is where it's important, as I say, about acknowledging the emotions but not wallowing in them. Throughout the Desolata Est, throughout this holy city being laid waste, the God's dwelling place on earth being laid waste, Byrd keeps coming back to these major thirds, strong chords being played, particularly on the Jerusalem part, but also within the Desolata Est. Every so often you'll hear this bright major chord being played, which is the sense of building hope for something in the future, of a restoration, if you like, which is clearly the socio-religious political thought of Byrd being played out. But I think you can take the piece of music away from its historical context and it becomes a work of art in its own right, in that it expresses that interior sense of loss that we can all feel at times, while still maintaining that sense of hope for the future. So I will put a link in to a particular version, which is the most beautiful version I've heard. And even though the pronunciations are very particular to this piece of music, I think they really work. I think they were deliberate choices by the conductor, and it really works as a piece. So I will, as I say, put a link into it here. I don't know whether I will continue to record in bits and pieces. It does help to take some of the pressure off doing a full hour's recording on a Saturday. It doesn't take away the need for editing, but I actually edited the one long recording of about 30 minutes into 3 different distinct blocks and it was about 20 minutes usable recording in the end. And I did that on Wednesday, rather, having recorded it on the Tuesday. I'm in a funny situation in a way, because I watch a lot of YouTube channels, and I watch some very good YouTube channels, some of which are high action, fast paced, lots of cuts between, and they're enjoyable, but that's not the nature of this podcast. Others are very professional with lots of professional graphics and statistics, and again, that's not the nature of this podcast. So I wouldn't want to go down either of those 2 routes, but I would like to improve the experience both for you as viewers and for me as the creator. But one of the important differences between my podcast and a lot of the other ones that I watch is that my podcast is not about the podcast. My podcast is about the stuff I do to show on the podcast. So the knitting, the crocheting, the weaving. So I need to do a lot of the actual, I'm not going to call it work because it's great fun, but a lot of the background creative stuff before I can actually film anything and be creative with the podcast. So it's a funny, it's getting the balance right between doing all the recording that I'd like to do, but also being able to carry on being creative with yarn that I'd like to be. So the balance will shift back and forth. For example, I have actually recorded the next 3 episodes of Anna Karenina, but I haven't actually converted it into a uploadable video yet. They need, all of the episodes always need, if I fluff a line, I will just re-record that line immediately afterwards. So there are little bits and pieces of editing. It's not a complicated process, but it basically means that if I read for 45 minutes, I probably got an hour's recording, and I have to cut that back down to the 45 minutes, and then I have to encode it, and then I have to upload it, and so it's all these extra little steps just take time. And of course, while I'm recording and while I'm editing, I can't be doing something else, whereas when I'm listening, I can. So I'm just finding the balance between doing the yarn stuff that I love and doing all the other YouTube stuff that I love and that I know you enjoy. And I hope, I will find the balance, and it will be a constantly dynamic, changing balance, I'm sure, over time. But I will be grateful for any feedback from you that I get about the inserts, whether you like them, whether you find they break up the flow, whether you'd rather I record it in a single go, whatever it is. I'm quite happy to hear the constructive criticism, because it improves what I'm doing, and it improves your quality of your experience. So it's a win-win all round. Excuse me a second. I have a couple of podcasts that I'd like to talk about now. I'm late to the party, but at about the same time that I started recording my podcast last year, a group of sisters in Grand Prairie, Alberta, also started recording their podcast, which is Cozy Up with the Stitching Sisters. And I love it. I love them. I think they are incredible women. I mean, they have very young families, and they knit professionally in that they, for particular periods of the year over the fall and winter, they will, particularly for Christmas time, they will knit gifts that they can sell at a local market, and earn a little bit of money. But they also run knit nights and classes and design their own patterns, and I'm really enjoying catching up with them. I think there's something about that family dynamic. I think because I'm from a big family myself, I kind of miss the family dynamic that we had as children, which inevitably you lose as you move out of the family home. And in my case, I've not had a family of my own, so I get a lot of that dynamic from friends. But there is just something in particular about the family dynamic of sisters sitting together, chatting. I think it's why I like the Grocery Girls so much. And there are usually three and sometimes four sisters involved in this podcast. And I just love watching and listening to the family dynamic playing out. And they're very interesting people to listen to as well, and great fun to listen to. So I'm really enjoying that. So I would thoroughly recommend Cozy Up with the Stitches Sisters. It's not so much a new podcast. I follow No Catchy Name Crochet, Ella, and I think she's, again, I'm amazed that a woman who has a young child and requires therefore a lot of attention from her is able to do as much as she's able to do. I mean, I'm stand in admiration of any mother who has the time or the energy to fill their life around their child with such creative things. But she has also been running a short series of videos on how to use Ravelry, which I would thoroughly recommend to you. I've learned a good deal myself, and I raise it because I want to talk about Ravelry. I've had a Ravelry group from the very first days of this podcast, but it has been something I've not really taken part in, partly because I haven't really focused on the social media side of the podcasting and the social media side of crafting. But it's something that I want to develop more into my second year of podcasting. So I would encourage you all to go to the Hand Me Downs podcast group. I will put a link in the description box below. I want to really, as I say, pick up and start going with this. And one of the reasons for that, I'm currently on around 390 to 395 subscribers. It's been going up and down the last couple of days, but it's always in the 390, low 390s. And I had hoped we'd get to 400 because it's a nice round number. But in fact, I'm happy to do this because it's my first anniversary. I want to be able to give something back to everybody who has been supporting me over the last year in their various different ways. And YouTube doesn't easily allow you to do subscriber giveaways. But I have run a random number generator on the 42 individual episodes of the podcast. So leaving Vlogtober and the rest aside, I've just used the 42 episodes of the podcast, and I ran a random number generator on that, and then I counted how many individual comments there were on the video that was selected, and I ran a random number generator on that, and I have a winner to announce of a giveaway that you didn't know that was coming. So I want to give any pattern in Ravelry up to the value of $10, which is basically most of them. 10 US dollars, that is. So most of the patterns are actually written in US dollars, which is why I'm using that rather than pounds. And the winner is Madame Reno, whose comment was the one that was selected by this double random generator. So if you can private message me on Ravelry about a pattern that you would like, and I will gift it to you in your inbox. But future subscriptions, rather future prizes, giveaway prizes, I want to start doing through the Ravelry group because it's just easier to generate random numbers from there. So I will, if you go over there and just join the group in the first instance, then that will get you into the kind of subscriber list to that group. But if I have any future giveaways, which I certainly am intending to do, then I will open up. I think I've actually got in there a couple of threads. I've certainly got one which is to say hello. So if you introduce yourself into that, and I will run another giveaway based on the people who have commented on that, and that will be a frequent but irregular giveaway, as a way of me saying thank you for everything, for all the support, as I say, that you've been giving me. So that's my Ravelry kind of update, and now I want to talk a little bit about Lent, because Wednesday, rather, as well as being St. Valentine's Day, is also Ash Wednesday, which is the first day of Lent. And I talked last year about the things I was doing in Lent, and they have certainly helped me. And even if, no, there has certainly been the case that of a lot of backsliding on my part on the Live Simply theme, but I think the point about Lent coming every year is it's a kind of new reminder to buck your ideas up. So I will be intending to readopt as much as I can of the Live Simply notion, which is not buying as things, particularly food. I've got lots of food in the house, again, all the store cupboard essentials, but they're all there and they're not being used. So again, I will try and significantly reduce the need to buy fresh or new food. Fresh food, as I said last time, bread and milk and eggs and so on, obviously they have to be fresh, so they're permitted. But generally speaking, I'm going to be using what's in the freezer and what's in my store cupboards again. And I would encourage everybody to just look at their own life at this time, whether you're religious or not, is not particularly the matter here. I think it's a good opportunity just to ask the question of yourself, could I live more simply? Could I have less of an impact on the world and yet still have as complete and full a life and as enjoyable a life? Because one of the important things about Lent is it's not a miserable time of year. The preface to the Eucharistic prayer in the Mass talks about this joyful season of penance. And I think that is a counterintuitive notion, but it's actually true, that the sense of that by denying yourself the easy things and by cutting out all the excess stuff on the edges that isn't important to life, you actually give yourself more space to actually enjoy being alive, that you're less crowded in on by everything around you. It's a way of getting a better sense of perspective about yourself and about the world and how you fit into it and how it works with you. So I would strongly encourage you to consider the idea of living simply for Lent. And I think it's in some ways, as January can be a kind of reaction to the excesses of December, Lent can be the preparation for all the wonderful things that will start to come into season with the beginning of the spring and the summer that Easter denotes. And by cutting away all the excess stuff now, we can really value it when we get to enjoy it in the glut of the year, in the summer. So I think it can give you a better appreciation of, and I think that's one of the truths about denying yourself a pleasure. Excuse me. And I think it's one of the truths about denying yourself a pleasure that, in fact, it can give you a greater appreciation of that pleasure than if you simply routinely indulge yourself without any real thought about it. That a pleasure deferred is a pleasure enhanced, if you like. And we live in such a immediate satisfaction throwaway age that it sometimes doesn't do us any harm to not just allow ourselves to have every luxury and pleasure that we want just because the mood takes us, but to actually say, no, I'm going to wait and I'm going to savour having that luxury so that it maintains its special standing for us. The other thing I always do in Lent, I mean, I do it at other times of year, but particularly Lent, is have a Lenten reading book. And this year, and they tend to be of a spiritual nature. This year, I have decided to read a book that I've had on the shelf actually for a couple of, let me see how many years I've had it on the shelf. I buy books because I think, oh, I'd like to read that, and then it just gets put onto the long list of things I'd like to read. When did I buy this? There's always a publishing date. Well, that's not particularly helpful. Ah, right. Yes. So, the book was originally published in 1976, but I bought it in, I think, 2004. So, it's 14 years old. But never mind. I'm going to read it now, and that's all that matters. I've got round to it. And it is Messengers of God by Elie Wiesel. Elie Wiesel is a fascinating character. He died in 2016, but he was a Hungarian Jew, I think. Hungarian or Romanian. Certainly from the southeast of Europe. And I think Hungarian. He was a Hungarian Jew who, with his whole family, was deported into a ghetto in the first instance in the early 1940s, and then in 1943 was transported to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where most of his family perished, and from there was also transferred on to the other death camp at Buchenwald. And he survived. He emigrated to the United States and became a writer, but more than just a writer. It's a hot topic of cultural appropriation, if you like, that in the West, English-speaking Christians certainly, we call it the Holocaust. And the Holocaust is a name of a type of animal sacrifice where it is completely consumed by flame. And there is an issue with that. Not that, I mean, partly because it is slightly in bad taste because so many of these people were completely consumed by flame after being gassed. But because it implies some religious underpinning motive to the mass destruction of the Jews, the Romanis, the disabled, homosexuals, communists by the Nazis. And that is it's just not the case. The Jews, the state of Israel and the Jews generally refer to it as the Shoah, which is the great catastrophe, if you like. And it is exactly that. One of the noticeable and understandable, entirely understandable reactions to the Holocaust by Jewish survivors was for them to turn inwardly and to turn their backs on the world and say, you know, never again will this happen to the Jews, and we will defend ourselves against this kind of thing in the future. And the whole state of Israel and Zionism has grown out of that. And it's, as I say, it's an entirely understandable reaction, not just to what happened in the 1930s and 40s, but what has happened to the Jews over 1,000 years or more of history, 1,500 years since, well, nearly 2,000 years since the destruction of the temple. But whilst it is understandable, it is limited in its outlook, and indeed can engender the very same kind of rejection of other that led to the persecution of Jews throughout European history, and not just Europe, but also the Middle East and Near Asia. Elie Wiesel was a remarkable man in that he turned outward. He decided that he was going to establish humanitarian works that would build on the total humiliation and destruction of him, his family, his people, but would actually turn that to good and share the lessons with the world and fight against the same injustice happening wherever it happens to happen and against whomever it happens to happen. And famously, in 1976, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, as it says on the front cover. And I'll just read the part of the citation. Elie Wiesel is a messenger to mankind. His message is one of peace and atonement and human dignity. The message is in the form of a testimony, repeated and deepened through the works of a great author. So this particular book is about significant figures in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament for Christians. So it begins with Adam, and then we have Cain and Abel, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, who was the son of Jacob, Moses, and Job. And what links all of these people is that they suffered, but that they overcame their suffering, and that great things grew out of their suffering. So, for example, Cain kills Abel. Well, Adam loses the paradise. Cain kills Abel. Isaac is going to be sacrificed by Abraham, his father. Jacob fought against God in the form of an angel and suffered from a sciatic hip ever after. Joseph was sold by his brothers into slavery, but came back and saved his people from famine. Moses was abandoned by his people at birth because of the instruction to kill sons of the Israelites, but he then is saved by the princess and raised as an Egyptian prince, and eventually leads his people out of bondage. And Job, of course, was the man who had everything in the world, a lovely family, everything his heart could desire, and God allowed Satan to test Job by killing all his family, by taking away all his riches, and eventually by giving him unspeakable illnesses and boils and pox marks and all the rest of it. And throughout it all, Job maintains his purity and his integrity and refuses to curse Job and refuses to say it would have been better if he'd never been born. And so everything is returned to him in abundance thereafter. And of course it's an allegory, it's not a tale of a true man. But they're all people who have suffered and who have been proven by their suffering and have come through that suffering and have triumphed. Or if they themselves haven't triumphed, then their suffering hasn't been the end of the story either. So I think it's a very useful book to read during Lent. I think there's obviously a lot of the author's own philosophy and understanding of the world 30 years on from the destruction that overcame his family. And I've read other books of his, particularly Night, which were his recollections of living in Auschwitz, Birkenau, and he's a very readable writer. So I'm quite looking forward to reading this, and I will give you an update on how that's going. So I think I probably talked myself into the ground. So just to finish off, I hope you found that very helpful. I have enjoyed spending some time with you again today, and I look forward to hearing your comments and to you introducing yourself over in my Ravelry group. So until next time, stay happy, stay well, stay safe, and keep crafting. So bye for now.